He's 40 feet away near the timeline. Now Jimmer sizing up Motz. Oh, no. Oh, yes! Oh, yes!
How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the Jimmer Range podcast after our summer-long hiatus. This is the beginning of season 2. We're very excited and ready to go. We're just patiently waiting for college basketball to start. In the meantime, we're starting to preview some conferences. We're starting off with the ACC, and we had to get Tristan Freeman on the episode. He is the site expert for Busting Brackets. Also, pretty well known on Twitter for some of his culinary exploits. So he is truly a man of many talents. Tristan, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you guys doing tonight?
We're doing good, man. We're very excited to have you. Some of you who might be tuning in as previous listeners or viewers might recognize Tristan from our Hot Takes episode. Some hits, some misses on that one. You'll have to go back and check it out. It was a lot of fun. Tristan, right off the top, I did mention some of your cooking that's gone viral on Twitter, and I'm not asking you to defend yourself because I feel like that would be a little disrespectful. But I'm just wondering, like, when's the cookbook coming? You know?
No, I'm more free to defend it. Sometimes you just don't have a lot of options, so you try to mix and see what works. And sometimes I had rice available and chicken, and then put it together. Then there was condiments available, and I'm like, well, why not try it? And it tasted good, so I just kept going for it. I think the issue, people are more offended that I call it a salad, but look, rice comes from the ground. There's meat.
You can't know.
And ranch is a dressing, so it technically qualifies. You just got to you just smooth things out. But
sure. I just feel like people should have come to your defense a little more for being resourceful. You were making do with what you had, so
thank you.
Yeah. So there you go. All right. So the way this is going to work, we're going to run through the ACC. We're going to start off kind of with the generally accepted top of the conference going into next season. Right off the top, UNC Tar Heels coming off a national championship appearance. Some people are calling them the new UCLA. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that. I'm not going to make Alex talk about UNC as he's a Duke fan. So Tristan, give me your thoughts on UNC and why they might not be this year's UCLA.
Yeah, I think when you look at last year's UCLA team, they had a really good players, but not necessarily elite. Like, you can argue that Tiger Campbell, although he's one of the better point guards in the country, he's not someone that's going to take over a game. And same with Juzang and Hawkins. Like, they had their moments where they can go for 25 plus, but they can also be quiet at times. This North Carolina team, they have Armando Bacot, who is one of the best players in the country, and he's right up there with Arthur Shishibwe and Drew Timme and Hunter Dickinson is one of the best big men. What he did in the NCAA tournament was legitimately historic with the double-double. So you have the ceiling with him. You have one of the best returning backcourts with Davis and Love. And although they can be erratic, they both can go for 30 on it. And overall, especially when you add, Pete Nance, a Northwestern transfer, who I think is going to be an upgrade for Brady Manick all around, it's hard to see why you wouldn't have this team number one when the only weakness you wonder is whether or not the guards can have an off night. But even if they do, Bacot's shown he can just get a whole bunch of those offensive rebounds and put them back in. So even that weakness is negated a bit. They have experience. They have a coach that has proven himself in Hubert Davis. You can't view that as a weakness. And they have a bench with 5 or 6 guys who are top 75 players. Assuming, they can get on the court, they have depth as well.
Alex, I saw you nodding your head when Pete Nance was brought up. As a Northwestern student who I'm sure has enjoyed more than one solid Pete Nance performance, what are your thoughts on Pete Nance to North Carolina?
I mean, I think it fits well. I just kind of echoing what Tristan said. It's a smaller sample size than Manick. So if you take the statistics for what it's worth, and he shot 49.7% from the field and 45.2% from three. He did not put up the 4 threes a game Manick put up, or maybe he hit 5, but Nance is going to be able to fill in at the 5 if Bacot gets in foul trouble. That immediately adds to kind of that depth, because I'm excited to see it may not happen, but I'd really like to see like a trio of Seth Trimble, Davis, and Love on the court at the same time. I don't know if that works defensively or not. I just think it'll be fun. And you can plug and play like Puff Johnson wherever, but I think it translates well if he slots him in at that 4 spot where he should. He's a great passing big. He can play out of the pick and roll if you just kind of want to put Mondo on the low block instead of kind of having him to work in that pick and roll game. But I mean, he's a great all around player. Someone described him as kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none. And I think that's a description, even though it's like that's not like flattering. I think it's a good way to describe him.
When I hear people talk about this team like they're going to be UCLA, and I was a big UCLA detractor last season. I was not on the UCLA bandwagon. But then when you kind of break it down and think about it, the way things broke, that UCLA team probably would have made the Final Four again had this North Carolina team not beaten them. So I don't know that being last year's UCLA is necessarily a bad thing. And I would say that they are more talented than that UCLA team. I mean, if you just look up and down this roster, I don't see how you can even I've seen some people put North Carolina at number 4 in their preseason rankings. I just don't see how. You have one of the most electric scoring guards in the country with Caleb Love. In our hot takes episode from last year, Tristan's ACC hot take was that Caleb Love would be the ACC player of the year. And it's entirely possible that he might have been a year early on that prediction. You have Armando Bacot, one of the best players in the country. You have Leaky Black, who's one of the best individual defenders in the country. I think RJ Davis could have a very impressive campaign this season. So just looking up and down the roster, there's too much talent here for me to think that they're not the best team in the ACC entering this season. All right, that's enough about North Carolina.
Yeah, I think you got that. Like, I don't know.
That's enough about North Carolina. Yeah. So let's move on. Let's move on to Alex's wheelhouse. We'll talk about the Duke Blue Devils. We won't talk about the shame that comes with being a Duke fan after last season and the way that it ended and the way that Coach K's career ended with 2 losses to North Carolina. That's neither here nor there. We're not here to talk about that, of course. Alex, what do you think a realistic expectation is for the Duke Blue Devils this season, given that Hubert Davis set the bar pretty high for first-year head coaches last season?
He did. And I just want to say this because I'm a big believer in Hubert, but I do want to introduce this as like a kind of like caveat here. Didn't Bill Guthridge, I believe that's his name, in 1998 take over what was mostly a Dean Smith roster and carry them to the Final Four?
I'm going to assume that you're right.
Okay. I just want to like, that's just some history that I think Hubert Davis is going to succeed for more than a decade at UNC, but that's just an interesting piece of history to me. However, I think going to the original question, I think a realistic bar for Shire is probably a 23-8 regular season. So maybe you drop the game against Kansas and then you lose in the PK 85 final for whichever one they're in. I think it's the Legacy. You lose that one to Gonzaga, so then you're 9-2 entering conference play, and then you go like 15-5 or 14-6. So I think realistically, like a 23-8 non-con, finish top 4 in the ACC, and then maybe like a semifinal ACC tournament berth, and then Coach K set the standard for what Duke basketball is nationally. You should always go into a season expecting a national championship, and I do like the composition and the construction of this roster, but I think a Sweet 16 berth. Like if you said Duke went 23-8, split the regular season with UNC, made the ACC tournament semifinal, and made the Sweet 16, I think I'd be happy with that in the first year.
All right. I'm going to throw this to Tristan because I think it's a realistic assessment to say that a lot of Duke's success for this upcoming season relies on how well Jeremy Roach is able to step in and be the point guard. So Tristan, if you could just speak to that, do you think that's a fair assessment for this Duke team?
Yeah, definitely. I do want to say first that 23-8 in Sweet 16, that sounds really nice for Florida State and Miami. I don't care who the head coach is, it's Duke. When you have the number one recruiting class, when half of your roster is 5-star players, it's Final Four bust. It's ACC title or bust. And they just have way too many good players. Like, if you can't win with Derek Lively, Dariq Whitehead, Tyrese Proctor, Kyle Filipowski, if you lose 5 or 6 games in the ACC that will be better than last year, but not necessarily that great, we're going to have a conversation about shots, because you when you have that kind of talent, you're expected to win with it. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with them, but a lot of it's going to come down to Roach. He's the one returning veteran player. He's a guy that's been benched the last 2 years at times, but he also played a huge part in taking them to the Final Four. So we've seen the ups and the downs. We've seen how he is as a playmaker, but now he's going to have to be the passer, because there isn't Wendell Moore, who was the de facto point guard for them last year. He's going to have to be the one that gives them 12 to 15 points a game, but also 5 to 6 assists. He's going to have to set things up. And it won't be easy because Whitehead's hurt, so he won't be 100% when he gets back on the court. You've got a front court that could be a little iffy when it comes to the pairing, because can Filipowski play the 4 and defend at the 4? That'll be something you have to deal with. And if Roach has his ups and downs, where he has his stretches where he struggles, unless Proctor can come in and fill for him, Duke doesn't really have an answer what they're going to do from the ball handler position. So it is going to come down to Roach. I think he'll be fine overall, but I do want to see, can he do it on a game-to-game basis and not have the 2-week stretches where he just disappears, because he can't do that this year. He disappears at any point, including in March, they're going to go home early.
I mean, because if they get late season Jeremy Roach, what he was at the end of last season and into March, Duke is going to be just fine if that's the Jeremy Roach that they get. If they get Jeremy Roach from before that, kind of a question mark, especially with all the new pieces, new faces on the roster, coaching staff. So it could be a big boom or bust year for Duke, but overall, I think I give the benefit of the doubt to the fact that they just have so much talent on that roster. I find it very hard to believe that this team just absolutely tanks. So I think second, I could see them dropping to like third or fourth maybe in the ACC if things like really aren't going well. But beyond that, like I don't see this as a team that would really bottom out. One thing, Alex, that I appreciate about you is that you're able to temper your expectations, because as a Duke fan, you understand like the historic success of the program. But as a Northwestern fan, you're well acquainted with failure as well. And so you don't set the bar as high as maybe it should be set. But
that is indeed one way to put it, for sure.
Yeah. I don't know. You're right down the middle. I think that's a good thing to be. All right. Next up, we're going to talk about Virginia. Tony Bennett's squad missed the tournament last year. It was an off year for Tony Bennett and company. But I think a lot of people are projecting them to be right back in the mix this year. They're bringing back essentially everybody. You get Jaden Gardner back, Armand Franklin, Kihei Clark back. It feels like he's been in college for like 12 years. You got Reese Beekman. Some people are predicting that he could break out. And then you bring in Ben Vanderplas from Ohio, who Maction, if anybody loves the Mac, Ben Vanderplas. So, Tristan, do you think it's a fair projection that Virginia will be back in the mix this year, even though they're bringing back basically the whole team from a squad that was very disappointing last year?
Yeah, I think you can assume that you can assume that they won't lose to James Madison again, which hurt them in their resume. And if the ACC is improved, then it's going to improve Virginia's resume as a result. They weren't awful in league play, but you can't have a down year by your standards, and then the league had its own down year and make the tournament. But they weren't a bad team. I think the problem with them is that they have too many holes that can't be covered. Like, they don't have a space in front court because Gardner can't shoot. And while Cedric and Cafaro are really good centers combined for 40 minutes, they're not going to give you a ton of offense. And then your best overall scorer is technically Armand Franklin out when it comes to just shooting. And he shot under 40% from the field. And when you're a team that doesn't have many possessions, when you're not efficient, that's going to hurt. Can Beekman have a breakout year? It's hard for a guy who already averaged 33 minutes a game to break out. Like, how much better can he necessarily get? Maybe people are arguing that if you play Kihei Clark less and have Beekman truly be the on-ball guy for the whole game, maybe that works out and possibly add another shooter or two. It could go, but I think defensively with Tony Bennett, they'll be fine. They'll be a contender. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Vander Plas, whether he plays the 3, possibly if he plays the 4, and Gardner plays a little bit as a small ball 5 because he's a rebounder. There are now more options with the transfers in the recruiting class they have. So I think it's safe to say that they'll be in the tournament, but I don't think they'll be, a top 15 kind of team. I think they'll be in and out of top 25 because they are limited by the lack of shooting that they still somewhat have.
Yeah, I'd agree with a lot of that. The one thing that I worry about and maybe not necessarily worry about, but my kind of thought with Virginia is that I really trust Kihei Clark as far as point guard play goes. I mean, he's one of the better facilitators, probably in the country, I would say, just because there's a lot of combo guards out there, but maybe not a lot of true points. And so as far as that's concerned, I do like Clark. But at the same time, I kind of feel like we've seen Virginia kind of hit their ceiling with Kihei Clark in a way. Like, I think they've kind of taken this Kihei Clark thing about as far as it can go. And so from that standpoint, I would like to see him take maybe a bit of a lesser role and see like what Reese Beekman can do with the ball in his hands a little bit more. But at the end of the day, I just don't see how a Tony Bennett coach team can have 2 off years in a row. So even though maybe I have my reservations about how far this team can truly go with Kihei Clark back in the mix, I just don't think Tony Bennett is going to allow anything less than a tournament appearance to happen this season. All right, let's move on. Florida State, the Seminoles, another team that was pretty disappointing. They finished around 500 in league play last season. And to be honest, I'm not totally sure what to make of Florida State. Part of me wants to predict that they'll finish 3rd in the conference. Part of me wants to predict that they'll finish in the 5 to 6 range. I do think Matthew Cleveland will have a better year. He averaged around 11.5 last year. I like some of the pieces they have coming in. I like Baba Miller. I think he could surprise some people. Tristan, give me like kind of your thoughts on Florida State and whether or not they can bounce back from a disappointing year.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of, back-to-back down year, it's not likely happening. Leonard Hamilton has become one of the more consistent coaches in the country. And he doesn't, he'll have his he'll have his 1 5-star guy, but the rest of the roster sort of makeshift pieces that builds with a lot of depth. And I think last year's team, just they lacked a point guard because, Jalen Worley didn't break out. Then you have a front court of guys who are just sort of average overall. I think they improved just about everywhere. You have Jalen Gainey, who was a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year at the Ivy League for Brown. He's going to be a sturdy defender for them. You have UCF transfer Darren Green at need of shooting. Caleb Mills, I don't think he was ever going to be the star people thought he was going to be coming from Houston, but he'll be perfectly fine for them. And as you mentioned with Cleveland, he has to be their best player because he has the most potential. He's a guy that scored 12.5 points per game despite making 6 total 3-pointers. So if he adds that to his game, then he can really be the go-to player for him, which is what they need. They have the defense. They still have depth because they obviously will return a whole bunch of guys. But they'll need not only Cleveland to take that next step, but Worley to sort of stabilize the point guard position, not have it be another group effort like it was last year, which clearly didn't work out.
Yeah, Alex, do you have any thoughts on Florida State?
You got to take – I think you just kind of – and sorry about, like, the camera issues.
No, you're good.
It's just been a bad week. It's been rough. But, yeah, I just think you do have to just kind of look past what happened last season. I mean, there were so many injuries, and I think I've just bounced in and out, so I'm not sure I heard everything. But you are waiting for those kind of like we are kind of projecting them. If you peg them to finish 3rd or 4th in the conference, you're projecting the least from Cleveland and Worley. And Baba Miller, and like you have to have those to be successful. But I don't know, when you have a walk on, what was that walk on averaging like at the last part of last season, like 15 minutes a game or something? Like you have to, you got to look past that if you're a Knowles fan. So I have them third, but I don't know. I buy into the fact that Leonard Hamilton will have this team right come conference play.
Yeah, that's going to be kind of a theme of this whole preview, I think, is giving the benefit of the doubt to certain coaches and maybe not giving it to others, all else being maybe equal. But let's move on. Let's go to Miami. Miami made the first Elite Eight appearance in school history last season on the back of Isaiah Wong, Cam McGusty. Isaiah Wong's back this year. Nigel Pack got his bag from John Ruiz. Miami reminds me kind of last year's NC State team with Terquavion Smith and Sebron, and just like guys who will give you buckets and not the best front court, and kind of a backcourt that's like electric, but they all kind of play the same position. So I think Miami will win some games on the back of Pack and Wong. Pack is one of the best shooters in the country, which has to count for something. But at the end of the day, I don't know that I like the on-court fit necessarily of all the pieces that they have to where I could see them being super viable as like a contender for the conference, or maybe even like a sleeper in March. I think they're a tournament team. I think they have enough talent to make the tournament for sure. But I don't know that I necessarily project them to be like demonstrably better than they were last season. To me, they're about the same. I don't know, Tristan.
Yeah, I have my concerns about them because neither Pack or Wong are true point guards. They're both better off as shooting guards, and when that happens, that can make the offense sort of your turn, my turn. Mm-hmm. They're both really good scorers, but I think the loss of Charlie Moore really they're really going to feel that because it made everything work. I think you can replace McGusty's scoring. I like AJ Casey. He's going to come in as an impact freshman. Jordan Miller is a 3-4 guy. I think he'll be fine. Norchad Omier is interesting because historically undersized mid-major transfers that come up a level, if they can't space the floor and they rely on their physicality to sort of, bully their way to producing, that doesn't always work at the ACC level. So what are they going to need from him to be good enough? So there's some holes that they have. I do wonder if they'll take a step back to what they looked like a couple of years before, because they need more than just Wong to produce. I think Pack will be fine. Ultimately, I think Miami will have their ups and downs until they figure out how the offense is going to flow.
Yeah, they strike me as a team they'll be able to pull off wins against sort of the upper echelon of the conference, but maybe will be vulnerable to some teams with some size down low, or even just like kind of another middling team. I think they could get knocked around a little bit. I don't know. Alex, do you see Miami as a contender for the ACC or kind of middle of the pack?
I think they're better than middle of the pack, but I don't think they're a contender. So if I'm making like I think they definitely fall in the top 6. I don't think they fall below that. I feel like that's a bit of a hit on them if they do. I think that's just too much talent. But like y'all said, it's too much to replace kind of McGusty. But then like Moore's impact both in like the offense creation and just defensively with the amount of steals he created. I don't know how like defensively how well Isaiah Wong and Nigel Pack is going to work either guarding the ACC guards. And then I also think too, like there's no Sam Wardenberg, which I know he's like very much hit or miss some games, but I mean that he was a problem for a lot of ACC bigs and the way he could stretch the floor. And I don't know if Omar can do that. But yeah, like I think if they fall somewhere in that 4 to 6 range, I think that's acceptable.
For sure. All right, let's move on. Virginia Tech. Another highlight from the Hot Takes episode last year was the prediction that Virginia Tech would win the ACC tournament. They did win the ACC tournament, believe it or not. But they lose Keve Aluma, mid-major transfer from Wofford. They lose Storm Murphy, who had his ups and downs, but was still like kind of a consistent presence in the backcourt. But they returned Justin Mutz, Hunter Couture, Darius Maddox, Sean Padula. They bring in Rodney Rice, who's a top 50 recruit. They bring in Grant Basile from Wright State, averaged 18 at Wright State, but it's Wright State. It's the Horizon League, so we'll see how he produces. Alex, what do you think?
I love Mike Young, so I buy Virginia Tech stock until it doesn't happen. Again, I don't think like the teams we've already talked about. I think they fall in that like 7 and 9 range. 9 might be a bit too low, but I think if they're like 6 to 8, I think that's fair. They're gonna beat Duke this year because Duke has to go to Blacksburg, so that's a win. And they'll, I don't know. I buy. Maybe it was just because I saw a lot of their TikToks when they were doing open gyms against regular Virginia Tech students, but Padula looked very good, and I like Justin Mutz. I think Mike Young figures it out. I don't know.
Talking about Justin Mutz, I really like Justin Mutz. He's going to do a lot of things that I don't think necessarily will show up in like the box score as Justin Mutz is producing, but I do think he's going to contribute in ways that are very important to this Virginia Tech team. I'd say that he's probably the X factor. I think pound for pound, he's the best player on the team, just in the ways that he impacts the game. I don't know if Tristan, would you agree with that, or do you think that there's somebody else on this team who might be a bigger impact for them?
So I think Mutz is the best player just because of his versatility. He led the team in assists. He's an outstanding rebounder, a capable scorer. He probably could score more now that Aluma's not in there. My concern, though, is that can Virginia Tech be a tournament team if Mutz is the best player? Or does one of the guards, particularly Darius Maddox, sort of step up? I think Maddox can be a breakout guy. I saw him in person at Pitt. He can shoot the ball when given the opportunity. He just didn't have a large enough role, and that's sort of been one of the critiques for the coaching staff, is that they sort of let guys, they sort of limit their bench early on and have some of the guys that get in there not necessarily do a lot. I think having a bigger bench will help them this time around. Memphis transfer John Camden, top 50 prospect, but he was part of a loaded, wing position there. He's someone that I think could really be one of those hidden transfers that really show out for them. Basile, I think he's probably more just a 15 to 20, offensive threat for them. I don't know if he can defend at the ACC level, and you don't want him getting much way. So, but between his offense and then the Rice transfer, Michael Pajit's defensive body, their front court will be fine too. I think they'll find a way, but it definitely will be interesting to see if Sean Padula can be an ACC starting level point guard.
For sure. Do you think that Virginia Tech is a tournament team though?
They'll be on the cusp all year.
Okay.
I think if I had to pick, I think they'll find a way because Mike Young is that good and I trust them, but they'll be on the bubble for sure.
All right. Good stuff. Let's move on. Let's talk about Notre Dame. Fighting Irish. They lose Blake Wesley, and it's never good when you lose an NBA talent and you bring back kind of it's sort of the same cast of characters that I feel like we've seen for the last couple of years that they haven't really done anything. So I'm a little wary of Notre Dame because we kind of know what we're getting with them. I think JJ Starling could be good right away, but they don't play defense. Like last year was their highest finish in terms of defensive efficiency in the last maybe ever. They never play defense. And I don't know that we're going to see anything different this year, which makes me pretty nervous for Notre Dame's prospects. Tristan, is JJ Starling going to be able to produce, maybe not in the way that Blake Wesley did, because I don't know that anybody's going to, but is he going to be a worthy replacement to where Notre Dame maybe can rise above some of these middle tier teams?
Yeah, they need to. I mean, and you never know with top 30 prospects. Like top 10 guys, you sort of can feel like you can guarantee what they'll do. Top 30 to 40, it's truly hit or miss. And they don't have a true point guard because Prentice Hubbs is also gone as well. That'll be an issue. Marcus Hammond, the Niagara transfer, he's more of an off guard, sort of another scorer for them, but maybe he can handle the ball too. I think the backcourt overall will be fine because they just have so many veterans returning. But an absence that's just as big as Blake Wesley is Paul Atkinson. Like he was the key front court guy. Sort of had Nate Laszewski sort of take a step back, and with him gone, it's sort of the physical 5-man. Are you going to have Laszewski play the 5? That would be an issue, especially defensively. And they have a couple of 3-star freshmen with Van Leuven, and they also bring back Matt Zona. The front court's a concern too because they can get dominated easily down there. And there's a lot of teams in the ACC that got centers. So defensively is a concern, but when you're a top 10 shooting team and you bring back 4 guys that shot over 40% and a guy in Dane Goodwin who quietly averaged 15 a game, I think he sort of flew under the radar in terms of how good he actually was. There will be a lot of 86 to 80 games next year. The question is going to be whether or not they'll be the 86 or the 80, but they'll definitely score a lot of points and definitely give up a lot of points too.
Alex, what do you think?
The way we describe them, I just feel like they're almost a poor man's Miami. Like I get that they're in the same conference, but if we have the same front court concerns that we have between Laszewski and Norchad Omar, like like can they defend the center? Like what are they going to do when you play Baycott and Lively or even Filipowski? Because we didn't talk about this in the Duke part. I'm not sure. I think Mark Mitchell might start over Filipowski, but back to Notre Dame. Because it's weird because like Trey Words too, you could see him coming on as the lead guard, but like who really is it going to be? I guess like who really handles the primary responsibilities? That's the big one. But again, like if you can swing the rock, which they do, and they shoot it at such a high clip, and they're Notre Dame, so they're going to shoot themselves out of games, and they're going to score like 63 and go 4 for 27 from 3. Like it'll happen one game, and then they'll shoot 55% in the next. So I don't know. I feel like we know what we're going to get here. JJ Starling's going to erupt some games, and he's a freshman, so he'll go quiet in others. But I feel like the baseline, if it's like Notre Dame screams middle of the road to me.
So what I'm getting here is that you think Notre Dame is like Miami just without the massive NIL budget?
Yeah. I guess the Catholics don't pay. I don't know.
Okay. Which is funny because, like, I mean, the Catholic Church has so much money, so you'd think, like,
you're right.
Somebody
they've had no problem being corrupt.
Yeah, that's a debate for another day. More corrupt institution, the NCAA or
the Catholic Church. Yeah, let's make that into.
That'll have to be a different episode. Yeah. But let's move on. Wake Forest. Alex, you can get started on Wake Forest. I want to hear your thoughts.
I don't know where to begin. So for context, I was doing I really don't, because I was doing my preliminary stuff, right? And like you go to John Rothstein's breakdown like you always do, and then I went and I read Riley Davis's thing for Heat Check, and then Tristan, I read your thing for Busting Brackets, and like it's all over the map, man. It's all over the map, and that has messed with my kind of where I see them falling. So
go with your gut.
Go with my gut. Okay, well, now I have to go find with what my gut said. Let me just go find where I ranked them.
All right. Here's just some quick facts on Wake Forest. So they lose Alondis Williams, who was a very good playmaker for them. They lose Jake Laravia, who's also a good playmaker for them. Both of those guys are going to the league. You bring back Davian Williamson, averaged 11 a game. You bring back some other pieces as far as depth is concerned. You bring in Tyree Appleby from Florida. I'm very curious to see what Steve Forbes is able to do with him, and make him like a lead guard of some sort. You bring in Jawatuka, I think. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, from Marist. He averaged 15 points a game. And you bring in some other transfers. You bring in Andrew Carr from Delaware. You bring in Davion Bradford from Kansas State. So overall, the transfer class isn't the most impressive thing in the world, but I also have faith that Steve Forbes is bringing these guys in with a purpose to make them maybe something more than what, their performance at previous destinations would necessarily suggest. To me, this is like the middle of the road team in the ACC is Wake Forest. I don't know if Tristan, do you have them higher, lower, about the same?
Yeah, I have them 8, and it's largely out of respect for Steve Forbes. Like, no one saw Alondes Williams going from the 4th or 5th guard at Oklahoma to ACC Player of the Year. Jake LaRavia was solid in Indiana State, but then became a first-round draft pick. So you're assuming that these transfers are going to work out in the way they need to. They may not be the biggest stars, but they'll fill the role needed, along with returning players like Davian Williamson and Robert McCray and whatnot. I think the concern is that they'll be good in the depth department, but will they have the go-to guys? Like, is Williamson good enough to be the lead guy? Appleby at Florida, he was like a solid starter. You're okay having him on your team, but he's not. He can't be the best or second best player, and you're winning. So they're a team that, from a talent standpoint, maybe you're probably in the 10 or 11 range, but the coaching sort of bumps them up to 8-7, most likely.
Yeah, based on his track record, I definitely want to believe that Steve Forbes is just going to hit on all of these transfers, especially after last year. But that's just such an unrealistic expectation to get 2 all-conference level players from like other places where like maybe they weren't these like top of the line guys. So I'd agree from a talent perspective. I don't necessarily see Wake Forest like blowing the doors off anybody. I mean, I could see them being on paper like at a disadvantage against most of the conference, to be honest. But yeah, again, we just default to the coaching. Steve Forbes, trust him to get it done, as we do with Tony Bennett, as we do with Leonard Hamilton. Alex, have you figured out what your gut is telling you? What's the gut check?
The gut check, out of 100, I gave them a 68, and I don't think I gave enough credit to Steve Forbes. So I do not want to follow my gut anymore.
Did you go through and get? Oh, wait. Okay, explain to the people what these numbers are that you're getting out of 100.
I had a friend at Notre Dame text me, and because he had a friend working up. They were just working on this project, prepping for the Notre Dame season, and they just needed some extra people to just kind of give like 2K ratings of, like, they were rating teams out of 100, and you just gave them what you thought was like a preliminary rating for what their season would be out of 100. And so some of these were very much just vibe-based because I was doing it late at night.
Sure. But yeah. I think that's telling that the vibe around this Wake Forest team is a 68 out of 100. Right.
Yeah, which in fairness fell at 10.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's telling though, based on some of the other things that we've said, is that maybe this Wake Forest team like overall won't be like as good as they were last year. But you still trust like the process that's going on at Wake Forest, that maybe that will elevate them to a place that maybe on paper they wouldn't be.
Yeah.
So that's enough on Wake Forest. Ladies and gentlemen, the time has come.
Oh, yes.
It's time to talk about the Pitt Panthers. I'm going to open this up to Tristan, but the way I want to open up the Pitt talk is last year, unless my facts are incorrect, but I believe last year, Pitt's football team and basketball team finished with the same number of wins. I think this year it's a lock that the basketball team gets more wins than the football team. To me, this Pitt team, based on what they're bringing back, based on what they're bringing in, I see them as more competitive than they were last year. I think the offense will definitely be better. But is Jeff Capel one of those coaches that you give the benefit of the doubt to? Probably not. So, Tristan, give me your thoughts on Pitt.
Yeah, so I think starting with Coach Capel, I think people have it a little off in terms of the criticism. I don't think he's a bad in-game coach, because I could argue that winning 6 games in the ACC with your best point guard being a former walk-on is a little impressive. I think the problem is the roster construction that sort of screws them to begin with. 2 years ago, when you had Xavier Johnson, Audis Toney, Justice Champagney group, the front core, once Hughley got suspended, was Coulibaly and Terrell Brown, 2 guys that are mid-major players at best. Last year, your backcourt situation, once Sabonde and Nikhil Horton went down, was Femi Odekale, who's a wing that tried to play point guard, Jamarius Burton, who actually was good, And then you had Izzy Akudo, which because they had no depth, even though Mogi and John Hughley was a legit front court. This year, you don't have that issue. You have Colgate transfer Nelly Cummins in, 6-year guy that was a mid-major borderline star. You bring in Dior Johnson, who was at one point a top 10 prospect in this class. And so far, I've heard good things about him, particularly the fact that he's not going anywhere, because that was sort of the criticism of the school. You add Greg Elliott, who was a solid shooter from Marquette. Savonde's coming back. Burton's coming back. You add Blake Pinson, who's a double-digit scorer at Ole Miss, but hasn't played in 2 years. And then Hugh, who I would argue player, is going to get a lot better because he's going to have a much better supporting cast. So I think from a talent standpoint, if you took the coaches and just focus on the players, Pitt could probably be in the top 7 or 8. But just from a talent standpoint, it's their ceiling. But it's their floor, considering the fact that the only proven guys right now is Burton and Hughley, they could finish as low as 13th or 14th. I think their ceiling and floor is very different. It'll be interesting to see how these pieces all fit and just how good Johnson is. If he's a one-and-done guy, him and Hughley would be a good enough pairing to be a postseason contender. So we'll see early because the first week they take on West Virginia in the backyard brawl. So that game will tell us a lot about both teams.
I'm willing to go there with you on Pitt. I'm willing to buy into this Pitt team as far as like you can buy into a Pitt team. But I agree. I think, and even Hughley and Burton, like by themselves, we're going to talk about some of the lower teams in the ACC. Those two by themselves are better than what some of these lower tier programs have as far as their best players go. Plus Dior Johnson, I think the jokes about, he went to 27 high schools and like can't commit to anywhere, I think those like have kind of masked for a lot of people the fact that he could end up being a huge home run as far as like a recruiting pickup goes. So from that perspective, I really like what Pitt has. I like that they took the swing on Dior Johnson. I like Nelly Cummings. I think he's going to be a good addition. So yeah, I'm willing. I think this Pitt team will be competitive. I mean, this is a team too that for all of their offensive struggles last year, beat North Carolina, right? So I don't think it's crazy to say that they can be competitive with better roster construction. Alex, are you willing to go to the Pitt hype with Tristan and I?
Yeah, I absolutely lean into it. I was just, while y'all were talking, I was scrolling through. I found Pitt's schedule, and I don't know. I think that's at least, and maybe I'm just insane for saying this, I think that's got to be at least 8 wins in non-conference. So if you're 8-3 heading into the ACC, I mean, that's going to have Capel's crew ready to go. And then you start with Syracuse. I mean, you start with NC State and Syracuse. Like, those could easily be 2 wins. I get there away from home, but I don't know. I buy into it. I was a big fan of Dior Johnson in high school, so like I'd like to see him succeed. I know he transferred a lot, which has been the big joke, and Hughley he's gonna be great. So he's one of those guys you don't have any concern about whether he can fit in like an ACC front court, even if he's by himself like there. So, but yeah.
The schedule is interesting because most of them are basically must wins. Northwestern and Vanderbilt are road games. They're 2 of the worst power conference teams in the country.
Yeah.
You have to win those if you're Pitt. You have to find a way. You take on Michigan in the Legends Classic. That's going to be arguably their only tough game there. You have VCU or Arizona State. But the key really, and I would argue this, is Tennessee Martin, the home opener. Pitt's lost their last 3 home openers. They lost by 27 to the Citadel last year. I mean, you cannot start the season off on a bad note. And hopefully, knock on wood, players are healthy, there's no issues. They have to not only beat Tennessee Martin, but beat them convincingly to prove that they're actually a genuinely good team. And as we mentioned, the home game against West Virginia, they lost the last 3 against them. You have to win that. If you get through that week with 2-0, then all of a sudden the fans are going to get hyped. And then all of a sudden the Peterson Event Center is going to start filling in with fans. So before you even worry about league play, you handle your business and win the bye games against your opponents. And I have noticed the schedule is a lot softer this year. There's some MEAC, some SWAC opponents in there, some teams that are clearly rebuilding. So I think Pittsburgh is not messing around with the Monmouth sort of sneaky that can knock you off. But they're not doing that this year. There should be some blowouts, and if Pitt's as good as they should be on paper, they should handle all of those games pretty easily and hopefully win the road games too.
Yeah. One thing, I just like looking at it, the 3-game road trip from November 28th to December 7th, where you have Northwestern, NC State, and Vanderbilt. I mean, they're not necessarily tough opponents. I would all probably chalk those up as like wins on paper for Pitt, but like a 3-game road trip, regardless of who your opponent is, daunting. I mean, that, especially with, and I don't know, I mean, does Pitt, the exams are going to be over by November, right before Thanksgiving, right? So they don't have to deal with that, or do you know, Tristan?
They should be fine in November. It's December that takes them away. There's not a lot of fans, and quite frankly, there hasn't been a lot of reason for people to show up. But I think, again, if there's actual hype, and right now there is because of Dior Johnson's presence, the students can find a way to get to those games.
Yeah.
All right. So for the record, we're all buying Pitt stock so that when they get a single-digit seed in the conference tournament,
correct,
we're cashing in.
15-5 in the ACC.
All right. Okay, Alex, I'm going to mute you. Stop. All right. Syracuse. Here's what I want to lead with Syracuse by saying that I think if you put them in nondescript jerseys without the Syracuse name on them, and you're just looking at the roster and the players they have, I think this team could low-key be an absolute train wreck. I like that Joe Girard is back. That's cool. But if your entire offense is Joe Girard taking contested 3-pointers and just praying that they all go in, I'm not sure I can really buy in to your team. They have Judah Mintz, who almost went to Pitt, speaking of Pitt, but he's now at Syracuse. But you lose the Boeheims. You lose Cole Swider, who was always good for a random, 25-point game at some point where he hits, 8 threes. Tristan, is there a real possibility that the Syracuse team just bottoms out and finishes 13th in the ACC? Or is that not giving enough credit to Jim Boeheim, not giving him the benefit of the doubt like we have for some of these other coaches?
I mean, has he earned it in the past few years based on what some of his teams has done? You can give them a one-off, but if it wasn't for the fact that the committee favored them highly a couple of times since they've arrived in the ACC, we would not be speaking highly about Boeheim because the program has really struggled. And considering that Joe Girard is their second best player, that is a major concern. I mean, Jesse Edwards will be fine. You hope Benny Williams can do something for them at the power forward position, but
if he sees the court.
Yeah, I mean, he has to though. He's only power forward. Yeah, they have no choice.
Right.
They got 2 4-stars in Chris Taylor and Justin Bunch. Hopefully, I didn't mess up their names, but one of them has to start because they're the only small forwards they have. I think Judah Mintz will be fine for them. He has to be great for them to have a chance, but they got a big freshman class that all of them are going to have to play. They did nothing in the portal other than get Duquesne transfer Monir Hema, and I loved him at the 8-10 level because he was a raw player still learning, but now you're going to put him in a system where he has to defend his own. And he is, and when I say raw, I mean extremely raw. I'm not sure if he's going to see the court, in all honesty. So that's going to put pressure on Edwards to go for 35 minutes a game. And if he gets in foul trouble at any point, they're doomed. So I think because we still respect Boeheim as a coach, I think a lot of us, including myself, have them in that 10-11 range. They absolutely can finish 13th if those freshmen aren't ready to contribute.
I've harped on the zone defense before because I'm just so sick of it. I'm so sick of the Boeheim zone. And the thing is, in the AC, like that works when you sneak into the tournament, and none of these teams have seen it before. Everyone in the ACC has seen it, you know. So at this point, like they don't even really do a lot for me as far as the defense goes in conference play. When that's kind of like the hallmark of Syracuse basketball is this unique defense. But everybody in the conference has seen it, so that's kind of not even really a factor. And I don't know that they have like the elite individual defensive personnel to maybe offset some of that. I don't. Alex, is the zone gonna take Syracuse, sneak them into the tournament?
No.
Or no? Okay, good talk.
They're gonna go like 6-14 in conference play. They're gonna finish 12th or 13th. I'm on that train. I really like Judah Mintz, and I have been a big Joe Girard supporter in the past. I just don't like. You're gonna get. You need like 45 a night from them. Like you're not gonna get that. You're not gonna get that.
Yeah.
You don't have the defense to hold teams to 65 a game. So you're not. It's just not gonna happen. I don't buy in that. Boeheim's gonna fire soon anyway. I think this is just an extended rolling kind of. He feels his way through the offseason and just decides to get on the sideline, pick up the whistle one more time. But
yeah,
he's winding down.
Yeah, that's you said two things that I want to touch on very quickly. We're going to run through the rest of these teams real quick, but Joe Girard is great when he's your fourth best player, right? He's not. I don't think he's the guy that you really want shooting the ball 15 times a game. I don't know that he's the guy that you want defenses keying in on necessarily. He's great playing off of Buddy Boeheim, but Buddy Boeheim's not there anymore. So I'm very curious to see what kind of the Joe Girard usage looks like this year. To your Jim Boeheim point, this is going to spoil maybe our hot takes episode when we end up doing that. But I think this is Jim Boeheim's final season. I'm calling my shot. I think Jim Boeheim is done after this year. Both of his sons are gone from the program. Team's not going to be very good this year. We've seen some other legendary coaches hang it up, in the last couple of years. I think it's a good time. I think things are kind of winding down for Jim Boeheim, like you said, and this will be it. Anyway, let's move on to Clemson. I really don't have too much to say on Clemson. To me, it's PJ Hall and a bunch of dudes. I'm quite frankly shocked that Brownell still has a job after being on the hot seat literally every season that I can remember. I don't know. I really don't know with Clemson. The thing with the ACC is that there are so many teams that I'm projecting to not be that good, but somebody has to finish 9th. Somebody has to finish 10th. So I'm not sure if I think Clemson can be one of those teams, but Tristan, you can tell me if I'm wrong. Can Clemson be one of those teams that finishes 10th, 11th?
Yeah, because Brad Brownell, for all his flaws, I would say he's a decent coach. His teams never bottom out despite not having as much talent as the others. They're a team that has a legit floor, but never a high ceiling, and that's going to be the case this year. I think Hall, hopefully, if he's healthy, if he's still lingering at the start of the season, that could be in trouble. Him and Hunter Tyson will be fine, but that backcourt, losing out on Jalen Llewellyn when they thought they had him hurt badly because their best player right now on paper was Boston College's fourth best guard in Brevin Galloway. And we're not sure what Alex Hemingway's going to do or Beadle or the freshman Dylan Mitchell or Dylan Hunter. Two of those guys, not just one, but they need two guards to break out. Just to even out the offense. And even then, as we saw last year when they had 3 double-digit guards, that still wasn't good enough to be in the tournament. So I think they'll be competitive. They'll knock off one of the top 4 teams like they always do. They'll find a way to win 6-7 games in league play, but it's not a roster that you're excited about.
Yeah. Alex, anything noteworthy to add for Clemson?
I don't know. I think they finished. I really do. I don't know. I don't know. I went to high school and played with Hunter Tyson, so I think I'm a little partial to like the Clemson project itself. But like, you don't know how PJ is going to come back from the injury, but I don't know. I think they're going to defend well, and they're going to win some of those ugly like 65 to 63 contests. And if they have enough of those with like the basement of the ACC that they're going to have, like that totally to at least 7 wins, which y'all mentioned. So, and if they in those 2 or 3 extra upsets against the top 6, now you're looking at like a 10 team. Like that's a top 9 ACC squad. But I do want to ask this, which lingering injury kind of affects a team's outlook more, PJ Halls or Dwight Whitehead? Like their future outlook for the whole season. Because if they're both,
I think it's PJ pretty easily.
Okay.
As far as like what, because Duke has the talent to make up for that, right? I don't know that Clemson necessarily does, especially with the backcourt being what it is.
Yeah.
So
well, Duke has Illinois transfer Jacob Granderson, which would be perfect for them. Clemson has Ian Shefferling, and they don't have any front court depth outside of him. So Hall has to be 100% for them to even be competitive. If he's only giving them 10 points or 5 rebounds because he's still hurt, then all of a sudden we're putting them in the bottom 2 tier if he can't get going.
Mm-hmm. Boston College went on a mini run in the ACC tournament last year. I like Earl Grant. I like kind of how he's running things over there. At the end of the day, I don't think that I want to buy in on a team where Mekhi Ashton Langford is like in a starring primary role. That just doesn't really sit right with me. Alex, we'll go to you first. Boston College could be, some people are saying, one of those teams that, comes out of kind of the scrum at the bottom of the conference and ends up with like the 9 or 10 seed. I don't see it that way. I don't know if you do.
I can see it happening. I guess I'm kind of with you there. Like, I don't know if I 100% buy Ashton Langford being that guy, but I really do like Earl Grant, coach, like you mentioned. So if they have some other guys on the roster breakout, like, again, like I find it tricky. You mentioned it. Like, once we get to kind of this 9 to probably 13 area, I think any of them could just totally plummet and just sink ship while the others capitalize on that. So if I would put more money on Boston College being that team over, I don't know, like a Wake Forest or a Clemson or even like an NC State. We'll get to that, but I guess that's kind of where I stand. Like they're not in the basement of the ACC. They're not Georgia Tech. They're not, and I'm sure we'll get to them. But like, I don't know. I guess that's just where I have them.
Yeah, Tristan, do you disagree with us that maybe Mekhi Ashton Langford is not the guy you want as the guy?
No, I mean, yeah, I agree. He's not. Ideally, it's Jaden Zachary, the sophomore guard that has to breakout campaign. Like their guards is fine, but fine isn't good enough to win in the ACC, especially when you have a front court that was average last year, then lost half its depth because now you're going to need the return players to do even more. So they're a team that will be feisty. Like you don't want to overlook them. But does anyone believe that they'll win more than 8-9 games in league play? Probably not.
All right, next up, NC State. I am a big Terquavion Smith believer. I want to get that out of the way right now. I would really like this team if Sebring was back. But to be honest, now that when I kind of think about it more, the fact that Sebring's gone, I think could actually benefit them in a way because last year we were talking about Miami as kind of a, your turn, my turn type of offense. And that's kind of what this team was last year, where you had, it was 2 or 3 guys like playing hero ball kind of the whole time. And that was basically it. It made for some fun moments, but as far as like winning basketball, not really there. But this is Terquavion Smith's time to shine. This is his team. And I think other people on this team will kind of default to that. And it might make for a more cohesive on-court product than we would have seen if Sebring came back. So they are a little bit of a sleeper for me, despite the fact that maybe on paper they're a little less talented with Sebring gone. So that's kind of my take on NC State, which is talking out of both sides of my mouth a little bit. But Tristan, what do you think?
No, I don't think it matters if they're less talented or not, because the talent last year didn't play defense. That's why they finished with 3 wins in league play. It doesn't matter how good you might be offensively if you let anyone score on you. So losing Sebron and adding maybe a couple of better defenders and Jack Clark and Jarkel Joyner probably will be a benefit to them, because they'll be able to score. Losing Manny Bates and having literally no front court to work with killed them. But now you have Dusan Horvich from Utah, who will be fine. DJ Burns, who is a Big South Player of the Year, he'll be solid for them as well. I think they're much more balanced. They have no choice but to be better defensively. The concern, though, is whether or not Tre'Davious Smith can be more efficient. It actually he's capable of going 5 for 18, and I'm not sure if the Wolfpack can survive that. So if he can give you 20 consistently, then he'll be that lottery pick projection we'll currently have him out to be. But it'll ultimately come down to whether or not they can get a second score. I'm not sure who that is. Maybe it's Joyner, maybe it's Burns, but they're definitely a sleeper pick because they can't go anywhere up from 15.
True. Alex, what are your thoughts on NC State?
I just think it's going to be a vibe. Like, just give Quavion Smith the rock and let him cook. Like, I'm so excited to see him play Kansas in November at the Battle for Atlanta. I think that screams a game where he puts up like the 30.
He takes over.
Yeah, where he had like Carolina this year. So I absolutely think he can hit 20 a game. Like again, like there's just so many defensive concerns. Like, where do you really slot them? Especially if like we have so many other concerns and we're so low on other teams. So I buy him. I buy him being at the very least second team all ACC, but I don't know if I buy NC State as a whole. I mean, I never buy NC State as a whole, but yeah.
We'll see how that pans out for NC State. Okay, we're going to run through these last 2 teams pretty quick. I think it's the consensus bottom 2 in the ACC entering next season. So we have Louisville and we have Georgia Tech. Both of these rosters are absolutely brutal. Louisville has basically one guard. They have L. Ellis. That's kind of about it. And Georgia Tech, barring another pandemic, I don't think Georgia Tech does anything this year. Alex, we'll go to you first. Which of these 2 teams do you think will be worse?
Georgia Tech.
Okay.
Like, where, like, legitimately, like, outside of, like, if we're praying Kyle Sturdivant rises up and this at least 14 points per game score, like, where are the points coming from? I get Louisville has one guard, and that is a major problem. But, like, is Georgia Tech going to win 3 conference games? Like, NC State was the worst team in the ACC last year and won 3. Like, is Georgia Tech legit going to get to 3? I don't think so. So, Georgia Tech is the worst. I guess that's the takeaway.
Tristan, are you seconding that?
Yeah, I think Louisville is poorly constructed, and that's going to affect them anytime they go up against a good team. But I could argue that the Cardinals have 4 or 5 players that's better than anything Georgia Tech has. Like the freshman Cooper Lands and Devin Reed will be fine. You look at Georgia Tech, they had 2 good players, loses them, and then replaces them with 2 guys who are worse than them on paper. And if Lance Terry, the transfer from Gardner-Webb, if he isn't good, where are they going to get their production from? Like Debo Coleman was a former top 50 guy. Maybe he breaks out. Someone has to offensively, but their front court's a mess. The guards are more or less average. And the only reason why I won't say definitively that Georgia Tech won't finish last because we don't know about Kenny Payne. And quite frankly, I'm not certain if there's enough good players on Louisville for them to be much competitive. I think they both could easily finish 1 and 2 at the bottom.
Where would you, just hypothetically, let's say Brandon Huntley Hatfield decided to go to Georgia Tech. Where would he be in terms of their best players?
I would say he be their best, but only because he has that 5-star distinction, and sometimes players that leave Tennessee and blossom elsewhere. So maybe he just wasn't a good fit there. But You bring back Rodney Howard, who isn't a power conference player. Jordan Mecca is mad. And Javon Franklin, who didn't do anything at Auburn the first go-around, was okay at South Alabama, but by no means a star. And now he's probably going to be the starter. So he would definitely be one of the best.
Yeah. So long story short, not a lot of good things coming out of Louisville or Georgia Tech this year. To close this out, we're at the end of our episode. The three of us, we're going to run through our order for the ACC this year, our predicted order of how they'll finish. So I think it's safe to say that we all have Carolina Duke as 1-2.
Yep.
Right? Okay. Then let's go 3-4. I have Florida State and then Virginia. I might flip that, but that's what I have right now.
I have Virginia, Florida State.
Okay.
Yeah, and I have Florida State, Virginia.
Okay, cool. All right, 5, 6, 7. So at 5, I have Virginia Tech. At 6, I have Miami. And at 7, I have Wake Forest because I'm buying into the idea that Steve Forbes is going to make something out of these transfers and coach the guys up. So Tristan, what do you have at 5, 6, 7?
5, I have Virginia Tech, 6 Miami, and 7 Notre Dame.
Alex?
5 Miami, 6 Notre Dame, 7 Virginia Tech.
Okay. So I'm guessing, do you guys both have Wake Forest at 8 then?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I have Notre Dame at 8. So then this is where things honestly, I think this is kind of where things could really get interesting, which is weird to say when you're talking about the bottom of a conference, but I think this could be where we see the most divergence of opinion, because it is kind of a mess down here. But I went NC State 9, I went Pitt 10, and I went Boston College 11. So Tristan, who do you have there?
Mostly the same. I had NC State 9, Pitt 10, and Clemson 11, just on the strength of PJ Hall.
Okay. Alex?
What did I have? I had Boston College 9, Pitt 10, NC State 11.
Okay, nice. So then 12 and 13, we kind of already talked about 14, 15. I think it sounds like we all have Louisville, Georgia Tech as 14, 15. So then 12, 13, I had Clemson at 12 and then Syracuse at 13. So I think we're almost in agreement there. Tristan, what did you have?
I had Syracuse at 12 and Boston College at 13.
Okay. Alex?
Clemson, Syracuse.
Gotcha. Sweet. So those are our predictions. I'm sure that, ACC conference play will do what it does and make sure that these all age extremely poorly. But for the meantime, those are our thoughts. It seems like we're generally around the same area with our predictions there. Big thank you to Tristan for coming on this episode.
Big thank you.
Sacrificing over an hour of his time. We're so sorry that we went long. But Tristan, do you have anything that you would like to plug as far as college basketball coverage is concerned?
Yeah, thank you. You can always check out my work at bustedbrackets.com. We're working on conference previews as we speak. I got the Pac-12 and SEC coming up this week, so working on that now. You can just continue checking. Follow me on Twitter at hoopsnut351. So plenty of takes and Pittsburgh love and hopefully a little Syracuse slander.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely go check out Tristan's work. He does excellent stuff. Alex, anything you would like to plug on behalf of the Jim Range podcast?
Well, follow our Twitter at Jim Range Pod. Follow Carl on TikTok. Please do that at Jim Range Pod. Also on TikTok. And plug. Carl writes for Busting Brackets, so I got to plug that. We both cover college basketball for Vendetta. VendettaSportsMedia.com. I will plug all the sad coverage I'll be doing for the Daily Northwestern. Because that will be rough. We got stuff coming out in mid-October. But yeah, and then Carl, I believe your handle has changed, but I believe it's at K Heiser CBB.
That is correct, yes, sir.
And then I still have my last name first, so Cervantes P. Alex, because I don't know. But that's I think everything we need to plug.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you to all of you for listening and or watching. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe, and share this with a friend who might be interested in some ACC basketball for next season. For me, for Alex, and for our guest Tristan, that is going to do it. Thank you all. We'll see you next time.